Welcome to the 615 Sessions podcast on this Friday. Happy week one to you. We're happy to have you in for another episode. We're always happy to have our buddy John Glennon from the Nashville Post join us here on the show. JG, it's good to see you, bud.
Thank you, Buck. Appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. Well, as is the custom, week one always, it's just kind of like you've had all this time in the world to prepare for a test, and I'm sure the football team doesn't feel this way, but at least for me, Johnny, I'm running around, I'm scattered, I'm picking up stuff that I should have got 3 days ago before we leave for New Orleans. I'm trying to get together everything that I feel like I need, and it'll be routine by the time we get to week two. But for week one, I always feel like I feel like I'm all over the place. I feel like I'm scattered.
Absolutely, and I'm sure these football teams, feel the same way too, because there's a newness to sort of both teams. And in respect to the Titans, you've got a new offensive coordinator there, so the Saints are going to be a little bit on their heels a little bit, wondering what he's going to bring to the table. Other side of the coin, you got the Titans are facing Derek Carr, a new Saints quarterback, so there's going to be some new things there, no doubt, even though the coordinator returns. So yeah, first week is always a little different. There's no immediate tape to prepare for. So you usually see a few things out of the ordinary, and then there's the customary rust too, since a lot of these starters didn't play much if at all during the preseason. So and there's a little bit of that factoring in as well during the openers.
Well, and as we do this, we now live stream the podcast. So as we do this on a Friday afternoon, there's been a football game played in week one, and I think you saw some evidence of a couple of things that you've just described, with the Lions coming out 21-20 over the Kansas City Chiefs on a road in a big spot. And as we get ready to talk about DeAndre Hopkins and his presence here and how big a difference that makes for the Titans wide receiving core, I'm sure that Pat Mahomes, in the absence of Travis Kelce, probably wished that his organization had made a little greater effort to acquire some better wide receiver talent, because right now it looks pretty bleak in KC.
It really did, and then Pat Mahomes was kind of doing his usual thing. He was moving around, he was creating time, creating opportunities, and still, obviously he was going to get a certain level of production, but you certainly didn't see the number of wide receivers running amok out there that is usually the case with Kansas City. And some of that, as you said, is no doubt attributed to the lack of Travis Kelce, who is not only a premier target himself, no doubt draws so much attention that frees up a little space for other receivers as well. But that said, Mr. Kadarius Toney did not have a great performance last night either. And there's been a lot of talk about him. There's always seems to be that the thought that there's that untapped potential with him, and then this was going to be the time that it really started to shine. He was going to have his opportunities, and boy, it could not have started with a bigger flop last night, unfortunately, for Kansas City. So it will be interesting to see what they've done, and perhaps they should have returned DeAndre Hopkins' calls, as he said in GQ magazine. I believe that was one of the teams that he gave a ring to and didn't ring him back. So perhaps they're regretting going ringless with DeAndre.
Well, that was one that actually he did speak to. The four that did not call him back: the Cowboys, Giants, Niners, and Detroit. Detroit, as a matter of fact, did not return his calls, according to the GQ sports piece. Always love it, Johnny, when we learn more about DeAndre Hopkins from a GQ piece than we have in several instances spending time with DeAndre Hopkins. Now, the media situation with DeAndre Hopkins, it appears, is going to be a bit protected, shall we say. That was my first reaction. I was like, oh, this is a very interesting and thoughtful guy. And I would have no idea after spending 2 months with him.
Yeah, it's, you're absolutely right. And it's a little frustrating too. Not only that, when players, it's it's their choice if they want to do an outside interview. Hey, that's what they want to do. But at least if after that article comes out and we as Nashville media are maybe asking sort of the exact same questions that were asked and that he responded to for an outside article, and that kind of we're getting less in response, it seems a little strange too. John Burton, I think, for instance, today asked DeAndre Hopkins, said, do you feel like you're ultimately in the best place for you, which was a question that he was asked in the GQ, and he kind of went on length about that, about this is the place to be. And initially, he gave a one-word response to John. He said, "Absolutely." And to John's credit, he said, "Okay, why?" And then DeAndre Hopkins opened up a little bit, said this is a team that's won in the past, that regularly wins, and that's the deal now. But yeah, it is always a little bit of a I don't know how you describe it, a gut punch when somebody who's not spent any time with DeAndre Hopkins that we know of, has a lengthy piece, or any Titans player for that matter.
Indeed. Well, words are one thing, actions are another, and we'll find out soon how much DeAndre Hopkins can really contribute to this football team. Johnny, I mean, he's been as advertised in practice, but so is Kyle Phillips, for all the good that it does Kyle Phillips when it comes to availability. So the production in the games is what will matter most. I'm more optimistic on Hopkins than I was on Julio. I think kind of going back through that exercise and I've really felt that way the entire time through the process of, do you really want a 30-year-old wide receiver on the Titans? You've been down this road before. Look at him. He's getting up there in age. He's not quite the same player. And then you look around and say, no, you idiot. He's still the best player in that room right away as soon as he signs here. And look at what the rest of the state of the wide receivers around the league look like when the best free agent not named DeAndre Hopkins was Jacoby Myers. It's just to see him and the difference that he's made in at least what we see from Burks and Phillips prior to the injury and the other guys at practice, it does make you optimistic about him and Tim Kelly and them being able to find some measure of success in an offense that keeps signaling to me, Johnny, that they want to legitimately pass more.
I think so. Yeah, it certainly seems to be the case. But yeah, I agree with the Titans kind of found themselves in a place, pretty much of desperation, at the wide receiver spot this offseason. And they basically told us as well, hey, chill out, no big deal. There's going to be people available. We're going to get our guy. That's why, when DeAndre Hopkins became available, they absolutely had to be, the team that was going to pay more than anybody to get him because of their desperation and because they had told us all to relax. If somebody comes available, we're going to get him. So that had to be done. And to their credit, they landed DeAndre Hopkins. I'm with you. I feel more optimistic about DeAndre Hopkins than I did, say, Julio Jones. And really, the primary reason is simply availability. That's one of the key reasons anyway. Through training camp, you remember certainly with Julio Jones, very early in training camp, was the first sign of injury. And that kept him out for weeks leading up there. And that's no way to build up any kind of relationship, any kind of chemistry with your quarterback. Whereas DeAndre Hopkins kind of came in, with a potential reputation anyway of is a guy that doesn't practice too much. Well, there have been very few days that DeAndre Hopkins wasn't out there. And both he and Ryan Tannehill have spoken very well about that, the relationship that has gone on between the two of them. So I'm optimistic about what they can bring to the table, and I do think they're going to be throwing it around a little bit more, and thankfully now they do have some targets out there, in a healthy Hopkins and a Treylon Burks, who certainly looked much improved in the offseason as well, and you look at Chigo Konko as well, and if you can find a place where he was not mentioned as a breakout player for this coming year, I would be surprised. Certainly the ceiling seems very high for Chigo Konko as well.
It broke up for me a little bit, Johnny, but I got the bulk of your point as we sit here doing a remote podcast broadcast here on the 615 Sessions podcast. A quick moment to remind you that the podcast is made possible by Relax the Back Nashville. Hashtag Relax the Back is where you go. Hashtag We Got Your Back Nashville. RelaxTheBack.com is where you go for the best office supplies to improve your workflow, the best mattresses and pillows to improve your sleep. All critical at this time of year, especially if you are a tired sports columnist or beat reporter who is schlepping around to practices and to games around the country. in this most busy time of year. Football season is back. Your sleep is important. Make sure you're rested. Make sure you relax the back. But Johnny, sorry, you broke up there a little bit for me. I'm doing this podcast in a parking lot of a gas station because, again, I put off a bunch of things that I should have done earlier in the week and had to run around and do the podcast from the car today. But your point,
my last answer, I was looking back at you during my last answer, and you were just continually staring at me. I'm wondering, why is he continually just staring at me without even blinking? And then it took me about a minute to realize you had completely frozen over. So anyway,
well,
go ahead.
That or it's the Botox. I don't know. I hear it's quite effective at this point. It's entirely possible. But yes, the Hopkins thing is going to be a curiosity, and even more so because Treylon Burks full go on the injury report today, as we've received the final injury report. Didn't feel like there was much doubt about that, really, as he returned to practice in the Labor Day gap week between training camp and the regular season. But then there's Harold Landry with the abdomen situation. He is listed as questionable. If it's pain tolerance thing, Johnny, I'd fully expect him to be out there. If it's something that they're worried that he might, agitate or that could cause him continual problems should they force it, then, I don't necessarily think that it's essential that he be out there week one. But I do know that that's going to be one of the biggest questions that we have, not named backup quarterback, which we will get to ahead of kickoff between the Titans and the Saints.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of had to feel for Harold Landry a little bit. Here he has spent so much time and diligent work, rehabbing his ACL over the past year. And by all accounts, he looked like he was ready to go. And all of a sudden, boom, he shows up on the injury report leading up to week one, not with anything regarding the knee, but all of a sudden with the abdominal injury there. So he was he was limited Wednesday, Thursday. He was listed as full go today, which is a little bit of a lighter practice on Friday, but still an encouraging sign. I agree with you. If you probably want to play cautious in week one, and one thing that could help in that regard too, obviously, is the Titans adding Travis Gibson here as well recently. And granted, he's a recent addition, so maybe not a ton of snaps, but still, anytime you can grab an edge rusher. A guy with 10 sacks over the last 2 years, guy who's really flashed at times. Certainly, I think he can bring something to the rotation, and maybe even a little bit more than we would have thought if indeed Landry, if they take the cautious route and Landry does not play.
It sounds like they're going to have Arden Key out there and available too. We'll see his debut in this Titans defense, and that figures to be their strength. They do have more depth there than normal, so if they wanted to slow play Harold, the presence of Caleb Murphy potentially factoring in, and Rashad Weaver, who we've obviously, I don't know that there's a ton of pressure on Weaver to perform, but certainly if Landry can't go, then it would be a good opportunity to show that he has some continued added value, and to give them the case to try and rotate these guys more. We talked to Crow earlier this week, Johnny. I know you were over there about, kind of monitoring Harold's workload, because I think he's averaged over 85% of the snaps a game when he's out there, and did not miss a game across 3 seasons prior to the ACL tear. So, how they play that this year, just in general, I think is going to be a storyline worth watching. Which brings us, of course, to the backup quarterback, which is, if they wanted to, Mike could go a calendar year and not tell us what they want to do at quarterback, even with Ryan Tannehill off the roster. And I'm terrified that he's going to do this to us every week.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation to say the least. And it's a bit of a head scratcher to me. Like, I don't know. As we went into the preseason, Malik Willis was the number 2. I mean, Mike Vrabel said it on draft day night. He set a clear pecking order. Malik Willis was number 2. So, aren't you saying, if in fact Malik Willis ends up as number 3, which I don't think is going to happen, but if it did, aren't you basically saying he played himself out of number 2, because it wasn't as if Will Levis did a lot in the preseason. He only played a half of one game, didn't even play in the second or third games. So I don't think you can say Will Levis is my number 2 based on what I've seen so far from him. That'd be difficult to do. So what you would be saying Again, if Willis is number 3, I don't think that'll be the case. But if that was, you're basically saying you're more concerned about the mistakes that Malik Willis made, and there were certainly plenty of them during the preseason, than you are, enthused about his playmaking ability. So the silence to me on who is going to be the actual number 2. The only thing I can really think, aside of a coach enjoying, being private, is that maybe
looks like we might be buffering again here, Johnny. So that is a shoot. I'm not sure if Glennon can hear me or not, or if you guys can still hear me at this point as we try and work through the connection issues